And it looks like everybody is in. So, well, welcome everyone. My name is Sister Colleen Gibson. I'm a Sister of St. Joseph, and tonight I'll be acting as our host for tonight's conversation. And as you're aware from registering, tonight's conversation is a conversation on women deacons and the power of language. So there's a couple of housekeeping items that we'll go through to begin with, and then we'll move our way into conversation. So just so you know, tonight's conversation is being recorded, and so it'll be available on Phyllis's website, which we'll give you a link to. It'll be available in the next few days to a week so that you can revisit the conversation that we've had, and you can visit any points that you might want to come back to. As many of you know, these are a series of monthly conversations that Phyllis and myself have been having. And so we're so happy for those who have joined us again this month, and we're excited about those who are new to the conversation. We think it's really important to remain engaged and to be talking about this topic of women deacons. And so a couple of housekeeping items. If you're interested in hearing more about these conversations or hearing more from Phyllis, we'd encourage you to sign up to be on Phyllis's mailing list for Phyllis's column from the National Catholic Reporter, and we'll post a link to that in the chat box. And on that list, you'll also get an invitation to these conversations. Tonight's conversation will be broken up into two parts, and we'll start, Phyllis will give us some input on the topic of language and women deacons, and then we'll move after that input, which will probably be about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll move into a question and answer session. And because there's so many people on tonight's call, I'll be acting kind of as the voice of the people. So people have submitted questions in advance of tonight's conversation, and I have those listed, but something might strike you in the course of our conversation. And so I'd invite you to type questions into the chat box and send them directly to me. Those are the questions that I'll integrate into our conversation. So you can see that if you're new to Zoom, if you haven't gotten on Zoom yet during this pandemic, you just go down to the bottom of your screen and you'll see a little chat bubble. You click on that and then just select Colleen Gibson, and those questions will come directly to me. I think that is enough for now, and then we will cover some more at the end. We'll tell you about upcoming conversations and a few other things. But by way of introduction, we welcome tonight Dr. Phyllis Zagano. And so Dr. Zagano is the Senior Research Associate in Residence and Adjunct Professor of Religion at Hofstra University. She's the author or editor of over 23 books in religious studies, including her newest offering, which is from Paulist Press, which is Women Icons of Christ. And we'll hear, I'm sure, more about that tonight. Dr. Zagano's recent books include Women Deacons, Past, Present, Future, Women in Ministry, Emerging Questions on the Diaconate, Mysticism and the Spiritual Quest, and Women Deacons, Essays with Answers. Her award-winning Just Catholic column runs monthly in the National Catholic Reporter. Her work has won numerous awards and been translated around the world. In August of 2016, Pope Francis appointed her to the Papal Commission for the Study of Women in the Diaconate, which completed its report to the Pope at the end of 2018. We always have a good time when we enter into these conversations, and so it is with great pleasure that I welcome all of you and that we engage Phyllis in this wonderful conversation. So we'll hand it over to Phyllis.
Thank you so much, Colleen, and thanks to all of you for signing in today. You know, it's I think we're getting all a little zoomed out these days, but it's what we have. So let's just do it. The point of language really has been on my mind ever since Fratelli Tutti was published. But it's more than just fighting over what Fratelli means in Italian, or as it has been translated. The Holy Father seems to have edited his document before it was published to say brothers and sisters many, many times. I actually took account. I think it's something like 55 times the word fraternity is used. The word fraternal is used 18 times. But many, I think 30 times brothers became brothers and sisters in the document. So there's no doubt that the Holy Father didn't mean to insult anybody, but I think we have to recognize that words mean things. And If you notice in a comment made by one of the new cardinals, there were 13 new cardinals named yesterday at the Angelus. One of the cardinals, who happens to be the guardian of the convent in Assisi, of St. Francis in Assisi, Italy, said, well, all men should be brothers. I was like, excuse me? I appreciate the sentiment, but if you're going to say, I mean all men, there are implications to that. And we can go into that a little later. But I think it becomes deeper than that, because what I find happening as I read through Vatican documents is that women are really being gaslighted in a way. They're the psychological term of cognitive dissonance. You know, I love you, but I really am too busy to see you. To send these two messages, I think, is something that rides along the stream of the words that are used. And if you look back into Vatican documents, women are not present. Women are not present, and women are almost cast as the other. Well, we are the other, obviously, but the other in terms of church. And if you look at these documents, they're clearly written by men, edited by men, translated by men. And it's the man's view of the world. When I was little, my mother said, it's a man's world, get used to it. Well, I'm not used to it. And I think it's important for us to say that women deserve a place at the table. The Holy Father has said this. And in a column that I think is going to be published on Thursday, I quote the Holy Father. 7 years ago, he said that similarly, the organization of societies worldwide is still far from reflecting clearly that women possess the same dignity and identical rights as men. We say one thing with words, but our decisions and reality tell another story. Indeed, doubly poor are those women who endure situations of exclusion, mistreatment, and violence, since they are frequently less able to defend their rights. Now, this is precisely the type of gaslighting, precisely the type of cognitive dissonance that figuratively drives women crazy. And what does it matter? I think women reading some of these documents have kind of a visceral reaction to them and don't want to continue reading. Whereas men either won't even notice it, or it reinforces the misogynistic view that women are somehow less than human. And so really that's where the question of language becomes central in the discussion about women as deacons. I've said this before. I was seated at a table with an official of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and I said, why can't women be ordained as deacons? He said, because women cannot image Christ. And I said, watch me. And that's where the title for this book came, Women Icons of Christ. The notion that you cannot understand that the risen Lord goes beyond gender. And this is not gender theory. This is not anything about what the fights are about. What it's about is what you heard in the 5th grade, that you are the only Christ anyone will meet. And that's true, because you were part of the resurrection as well. So I know we had a lot of questions. I made a mistake for those of you who registered and had to put in your names and address and phone numbers and blood type and several other things. I made a mistake in the way I set the thing, but be of good cheer, because I have no idea how to use that information. And I'm not the collection bureau. I'm not looking for money. So I stopped that after the first 100 of you registered. But it was interesting to see what folks do. I was really, really interested to see the vocations many of you have. And I'm so honored that you came to talk with us. But I want to get to your questions and talk with you. So Colleen, let's have it.
Okay, and I think one of the happy faults of the invasive registration process was it required people to comment or ask a question. So it made my job a whole lot easier, because the first 100 people had to ask a question. So I had to sort through things. So Phyllis, I'd like to pick up, there were a bunch of questions around language. And so I think that might be a good place to start, picking up on what you were just talking about. One of the questioners said, can you explain what dual anthropology is? And is there any way to get your books, which I know mention and talk about dual anthropology? Is there some way to get those books into the hands of the Pope? So could you first, I think, define or explain what dual anthropology is and why the questioner might think it pertains to this topic? And then how do we raise that up?
Well, dual anthropology means just that there are male people and female people, and that they are different. Well, we agree that they're different, but we need to also agree that they are the same in the eyes of God. So the notion of dual anthropology is discussed in my book, Holy Saturday, which came out in the year 2000. In one of the beginning chapters that's highly philosophical and really very boring, but it is discussed. And in terms of getting the book in the hands of the Holy Father, that book was translated into Spanish by, I forget, but it was translated to Spanish in Spain, and I gave it to the Holy Father. So he does have that book. He also has this book, Women Icons of Christ, and I know he received it. I know he received that book. There are other books floating around. Women Deacons, Past, Present, Future has been translated into Portuguese, Spanish, French, and English. It was floating around it was written in English. It was floating around during about a year ago at the Amazon Synod. So I can't imagine that the Holy Father wouldn't have at least seen it, because I know that the people in the Synod received copies of it according to their language group. But again, language is so connected to culture, and we need to give people the benefit of the doubt when they express a concept in their given language, in their individual language. But again, we need to also understand that as these expressions are translated, as the expression of people's understandings and thoughts are translated into other languages, they can become offensive. I find it difficult with all the translation of the church as she. I find it difficult when the Holy Spirit, which in Greek is neuter, when the Holy Spirit is translated as he. So I don't know that, I don't know where the discussion ends, but I know it needs to begin. And because when you think of it, the Holy Father has said we need a theology of the woman. What does that mean? Is that like, all of these theologies are of people other than white men, and why do we need a theology of the woman? Well, who needs the theology of the woman? Well, the people who are writing the theology need the theology of the woman. Well, why? Because they don't understand women. How don't they understand women? They don't consider women as equals. Now, I'm not putting a blanket, argument against every cleric in the world, but because the men that I met in Rome and many of the people I've worked with over the years here in the United States and elsewhere, either as professors and priests I've known who are in pastoral ministry, are certainly well-formed and well-educated individuals. But there seems to be an overriding trajectory of the woman as other. And so long as that exists, I think we have a long way to go. So.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting. And a number of questioners and comments that came in talked about the use and the impact of language in creating or stifling cultural change or a culture, or really even a theology or doctrine or praxis. So I think that's helpful to think about, the words that we use matter and the way in which they're translated matter. Another question that came in, which is, it's kind of an issue of semantics, but the questioner asked, they said, I've heard the titles deacon and deaconess used. Which is more appropriate? And then where does this confusion come from? Why do the two terms exist?
Okay. Well, it's very simple. Deacon is what it is. All right. The deacon is the deacon in today's understanding, in today's lexicon. And deacon is what Phoebe was. There was no gender assigned to the term. Phoebe was a deacon, as if Phoebe was a plumber. You know, when you open the door and the plumber comes and it's a female, it's not a plumberess. But in certain kinds of languages, we tend to feminize certain terms. In Italian, I'm a professoressa. I might have been, I'm too tall probably, but I might have been a stewardess, you know, in English. But those terms are really an accretion of language, as language itself adopted gender. So if you remember agricola, agricolae, you know, in Latin, not nouns have gender. Well, in English, nouns don't have gender. And so that's one distinction there. The other distinction is that as the church developed, so did language. And so the females who were ordained as deacons became called deaconesses in certain languages. The Georgian language has no gender, so, you know, they just weren't called deaconesses. But then it gets even more confusing, because in some cultures, the women who were called deaconesses were the wives of deacons, or even the wives of bishops. But others were ordained deacons. And sometimes the wives of deacons or bishops were ordained as deacons, and they were called deaconesses. So in any event, if you fast forward to the 21st century, actually the 20th century, in my conversations with Professor Sarah Butler, who years ago was asked by Cardinal Ratzinger to write about why women cannot be priests. She and I decided that she would stay out of my lane and I would stay out of hers. That didn't happen, and she crossed over into the deacon discussion for women. But we agreed that when she says deaconess, she means an unordained, a non-ordained kind of fourth group of individuals who, as Cardinal Casper said about 14 years ago, they can dress up and move about the altar, but they really wouldn't be ordained. Whereas when I say deacon, I mean woman deacon, I mean someone who is sacramentally ordained, as we have evidence for really through the centuries. Somebody was talking to me about the 10th century Germanic pontifical, which I know is hopelessly interesting to you, but it does have a sacramental ordination ceremony in it for a woman deacon. So I hope that's useful.
I think it is. I think it's interesting. It's a little bit of inside baseball, but also the larger view. One of the questions while you were speaking that came in, Phyllis, is would more emphasis on God as not gendered and even imaged as both male and female in Scripture help with spiritual parity for women in the church, do you think?
Yes, but I don't go so far as to, you know, in the name of the Creator, the Redeemer, the Sanctifier. I think we have perfectly good liturgical formulae. And I don't get upset about God the Father, understanding that God is also the Mother, if God is truly the Creator of all. So depending on what translation you're talking about, you know, recently there was a determination that individual bishops' conferences could be the ones to decide on the proper translations for their scripture and for their liturgy, rather than a central authority in Rome, which may or may not be from the culture. So the church is agreeing with me that we need to pay attention to what words mean in certain cultures. I mean, you know yourself, in Australia, words in English mean sometimes things different from the words in America, in the United States, or in Britain, or in Ireland, or in South Africa, or in India. And we have to be very careful, even speaking English, to make sure we don't offend people. And then Spanish is a wonderful example, because different kinds of Spanish have different kinds of meanings. So So I think yes, in terms of the understanding of liturgy and the understanding of church and the understanding of who we are in relation to God, it is useful to pay attention. Um, Again, as I said earlier, it's grating on me when I hear the church referred to as she in the liturgy. But I don't have a placard, and I'm not picketing about it. I just want to point the fact out that some of these things are off-putting, and we don't need to be off-putting when we're talking about evangelization.
Mm-hmm. This originally, the topic of conversation around language really came from Fratelli Tutti. And so a question came in about the encyclical, and the questioner wants to know, what impact does that document portend for women deacons?
I don't know. The one paragraph that I read is from that document, is from Fratelli Tutti, which I read earlier. And he says, doubly poor are those women who endure situations of exclusion, mistreatment, and violence, since they're frequently less able to defend their rights. It says individual societies worldwide are far from reflecting clearly that women possess the same dignity and identical rights as men. Well, we're a pretty big organization with 1.2 billion people. And what's upsetting is that Fratelli Tutti is quoting the Holy Father from something he said in 2013. So he is emphasizing that there hasn't been a lot of movement, and I am emphasizing that there hasn't been a lot of movement in the church because it says, oh, we great dignity and more positions of responsibility, but what has happened? You know, what we named 13 cardinals yesterday, all wonderful men, I'm sure. The interesting thing is I was told that 15 rings were ordered. So I'm kind of hoping that two of those rings are held in pectore for women, but you know, that's kind of a pipe dream. But I think we haven't gotten there yet. And I think Fratelli Tutti we can argue both ways in terms of that document. He does have that very strong statement there on supporting women, but the rest of the document itself is written to brothers. And I think I said this, well, so what? So what if it's written to men by a man, quoting St. Francis, and the quote Fratelli Tutti, omnes fratres, was only to St. Francis's brothers. Well, so what if it's by a man, quoting a man, written to men about the ills of the world? Because quite frankly, it's the men who have messed up the world. I mean, it's not the women who have messed up the world. So he's kind of supporting my point here, that he needs to say something to the men who have kind of made a mess of things.
Along those lines, a series of questions have come in terms of, what could Pope Francis do? Does Pope Francis want to do something and he can't? And so one of the questions that I think captures that is it possible that Pope Francis would like to move the women deacons issue further along, and yet he feels that he can only go so far because of misogynistic views of men in the church or in the church in general?
Yeah. I'm not a mind reader, and I don't know the mind of the Holy Father. I will tell you that today, this morning in Rome, he met with Cardinal Petrocchi and with Petrocchi and with Dennis Dupont-Fauville. Dupont-Fauville is the secretary of the new commission, and the Cardinal of Aquila is the president of that commission. So he did meet with them this morning. On the question of his moving forward, clearly he is a man who wishes to have the church move forward together. But I will tell you that doing some research today, I noted that in the early 1970s, I want to say 1971, there was a German synod And again in 1975, a conference of bishops in Germany, who said, well, yes, women deacons are very important, but we need to talk about this more and we need to all move together. Well, that was 45 years ago. And this is the comment that it has been repeatedly made by bishops' conferences. And in a sense, in the 2002 document on the Diaconate, which came out of the second, actually the third, I'm still researching it, but I'm certain it was the third ITC commission on subcommission on women deacons. That 2002 document that came out of the ITC, the International Theological Commission Subcommittee, said, well, men and women deacons weren't exactly the same, but the diaconate is clearly different from the priesthood. And so the question of women deacons needs to be understood and pronounced by the magisterium. Well, that's the Pope. And that was in 2002. So it went up to John Paul II, who did nothing. And then the next Pope was Ratzinger, who did nothing. And now we have the Holy Father, who I sincerely believe is trying to move the church forward. But if he doesn't do something soon, he needs to understand that if the church doesn't move forward, it's going to turn around and realize that all the women have walked away. Because I think women have just about had it with being excluded. And Professor Supa and Supa in France applied to be the Archbishop of Lyon. She's a 73-year-old theologian and fairly quite qualified to take over from Philippe Barbarin. But the other day, the nuncio actually met with Supa and met with a French group called All Apostles, women who are applying to be deacons, who are applying to be priests, and was very encouraging to them. And yes, we're taking you seriously. And yes, it's very interesting. And then turned around and appointed a 60-year-old former French paratrooper who's the Bishop of Corsica in France, and apparently connected to Opus Dei. And he became the Archbishop of Lyon and primate of all the Gauls. So yes, of course, we're taking you seriously, and we're very interested in what you have to say. So we're going to Opus Dei to get a bishop for you. It's
a strange way of thinking. Phyllis, you've kind of already answered this, but I'd be remiss not to ask it. It's around decision-making authority. And so who has the legal authority to make the changes to allow women to be deacons and to have deeper participation? That comes down to the Holy Father?
Yes. Technically, it would be the Pontifical Commission for the Interpretation of Legislative Texts that would have to change the canon 1024. And all that would have to say is only a baptized male is validly ordained as a priest. Right now it says is validly ordained. And the history of canon 1024 is very interesting because it was kind of created in the 10th, 11th, 12th century. Things became codified that you couldn't be ordained a deacon unless you were on the way to be ordained a priest. So only a baptized male is validly ordained. Was really, as I said, it really pertains to the priesthood. So there are, I think, 4 different canons that would have to be changed. 2 of them refer to the lectorate and the being an acolyte, because you currently have to be installed, not ordained, but installed to these what used to be the remnants of these minor orders as lector or acolyte. And that's another one. I mean, over the years, over the past 30, 40, even 50 years, various synods and synod of bishops actually, not that long ago, I think 2008, voted to allow women to be installed as lectors and acolytes, and nothing happened. It was a recommendation, a formal recommendation of the 2019 Amazonian Synod, asked for women lectors and acolytes. It also asked that the Holy Father consider women as deacons and send the their interest back to my commission. And he said he would, but then he didn't, and he created a whole new commission, which he named on Spy Wednesday this year on April 8th. Within that synod, let me just get back to the Amazon Synod, 9 of the 12 language groups voted or evidenced support for women as deacons. So that's a very interesting thing coming out of the Amazon, and we can see where that develops.
There's a number of directions. You gave us a lot right there. You brought up the commission. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit. In the past, we've talked about kind of the status of the current commission and what they could be looking at. I think maybe just for people who are new to these conversations, maybe you could just talk about, you can't talk about your time on the commission, but as you see it, what the commission now is looking at, and maybe to help in that conversation. Another question came in about, we constantly look at the past and look at the historical precedent. And so the questioner says, are we not looking at the role of the Holy Spirit and what is needed today? So maybe that all together.
I think that is really what is the most important point of the whole thing. We need to accept the fact that the Spirit is alive and working in the church, else we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But we also need to recognize that we can just talk a little too much about waiting for the movement of the Spirit. The fact of yet another commission can be upsetting to people, but it also can be hopeful. The commission I was on was made up of individuals, the majority of whom, more than the majority of whom, had never addressed this question at all. 2 of us, Father Bernard Poitier and myself, had written about it, and since then we've published. Just a little digression here. If we're interested in how the conversation is moving, we published an article we wrote in French, and that appeared in Canada. That is now being republished in French in Kinshasa, Congo. We then translated it and put it into English in India, and that is being republished in English in Kansas in the United States, and also in Nairobi in Kenya in English. It's also been translated into German and will be published in Austria and Spanish, and it will be published in Argentina. And it's being translated into Italian to be published in Italy. And I believe there's movement underway to publish it in Brazil, possibly in Portuguese. So this is a conversation that is certainly worldwide. In terms of the old commission, the new commission, myself and Poitier were the people who had written on the topic. I was pretty much assumed to be the expert on the topic, but there were fine scholars who had really never looked at the topic before, most of them. And as in any commission or any group of scholars, a bunch of academics sitting around. And if you have 2 people with PhDs, you'll certainly have at least 3 or 4 different opinions. So, that is how those things go. The same thing may happen with the new commission, although to my mind, none of the people has worked on women deacons. At least none has done original work. One of the new commissioners, a German Mariologist named Manfred Hauk, published a book against women deacons, which was heavily dependent on a previous book by Marimort, and he was a student of Ratzinger. There was on that commission, there's an Italian liturgist, Father Angelo Lameri, who published a huge article examining the various ordination rites for the ordination of male deacons, but he eliminated any mention of the rites for women deacons that are even in these same rites that he was discussing. So maybe he felt it was outside his wheelhouse. I don't know. He published that in 2008. another woman, a woman, she's actually an American, but she has taught at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lvov. She criticizes work by Vagagini, who's a famous writer who wrote at the request of Paul VI positively. And she argued that an ontological distinction exists between male and female deacons. Well, that redounds to the point of dual nature anthropology. That is what dual nature anthropology means, that there's an ontological distinction between male deacons, and there is no way I can explain that or defend it. So maybe I went a little off topic there. Tell me where to go now.
Let's see, what direction do we want to go? An interesting insight and question just came in, and the discussion there for a bit talked about, women leaving the church, and the questioner comments, we're talking about women leaving the church, but shouldn't we have a greater concern that women are not coming into the church? And so a number of people have remarked, when you look at the faces of the people on this call, they're more mature. How they might be past their ability to be deacons. So how do we work to promote this cause among younger people? And also the question of, do you think it's a waiting game? The hierarchy is waiting because if they wait long enough, the younger people in the church are more traditional.
Well, that's true. I think it's called by people in the right wing the biological solution, that we're just going to go away and stop talking about it. In terms of tonight's call, I recognize we're probably up against Monday Night Football, but I don't think this is a conversation that young people have because they just don't even know about it. I was surprised to learn that a story, it's a short story I'll tell you, a woman in the United Kingdom, her daughter went for confirmation and said she wanted St. Phoebe to be her confirmation name. And the priest said, oh, no, you can't have that. There's no St. Phoebe. And the child said, yes, there is a St. Phoebe, and she was the first woman deacon. So, but who taught her that? I know I have a book manuscript out called Elizabeth Visits the Abbey, which I hope will be published somewhere sometime, about the history of women in the church, and it's for 12 to 14-year-olds. Another book that's out that's written by a friend of mine is for second, third, fourth graders, pretty much what's a deacon. We don't have these discussions in schools really, and so children are not growing up knowing the history of the church, knowing that there have been women deacons, and certainly we've lost a whole generation in the church. The people on this call, their children perhaps have left the church, and if their children have left the church, then their grandchildren are not being brought into the church. So I think it is a problem of evangelization. But if you try to explain to a 16-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 25-year-old that the Catholic Church has something to offer to them, I think you'll get a pretty immediate negative reaction, not only because of the scandals, but also because of the attitude, the perceived attitude of the church towards women. What do you think?
I think it's a complicated question. And I'm sorry if I insulted everybody on the call. I'm getting all these comments about talking about mature people.
What do you think? What is your?
I think it's a matter of, you use that word evangelization. It is a matter of getting the word out there about this issue and perpetuating an ideal of hope, that it is hopeful that there can be change in the church and that there are ways of working about it. I know I just recorded something for All Saints Day. They asked me, it was for a college campus ministry project. And they said, oh, who's your favorite saint? I said, oh, well, I'm a sister of St. Joseph. I love St. Joseph. I said, but I'm enamored by St. Phoebe right now. And so I think it's planting those seeds, and it's showing models of faith, and it's how to bridge the gap between these groups, to say, it's not a division of age. It's a matter of drawing people together and saying we can learn from one another and move forward, and we can call for change together.
Well, I agree. And I think that what we have to, I think there's just a cognitive dissonance. I love that term, between the teaching of the church and the way the church appears in the world. The church appears that we all have dignity, that we all have value, that we all have worth. Well, I tell them, look, until you have a woman ordained, until you actually say a woman is able to receive the sacrament of order, until you have a woman preaching, until you have a woman proclaiming the gospel in St. Peter's, then I'm going to blame you for wife beating. I'm going to blame you for dowry burning. I'm going to blame you for menstruation huts and rapes and beatings and all sorts of horrendous things that happen to women. I'm going to blame you, church hierarchy, for the discrepancies in pay for women who have to work. I'm going to blame you for all of these things. And that, I think, is the message that young people are getting, that the church says one thing and does another. And the next synod, bishops in Rome will be on the topic of synodality in 2022, if all things go well. And I'm told, oh, well, women will be on the agenda. Well, give me a break. Women can be on the agenda all you want, but until you're doing something and you're not talking, until you're putting your money where your mouth is, you're going to continue losing people. Now, the other side of the coin is the very strict interpretations of Christianity that tend to plant the seeds for some groups of lay people and religious that are difficult to be kind, and which foster a kind of rigidity that to me is not a good understanding of the Christian message. And they're very attractive to young people because, boy, if you're 16 or 18 or 20 and you want somebody to tell you exactly how to live and exactly how to make a life and exactly what to do, and they're very attractive, these groups, and they're the groups that Sickle Cell, the Congregation for Institutes of Secular and Religious Life, shut down because of abuses. So,
Phyllis, one of the questions that came up, it's along these lines. The questioner talks about, the institution of female altar servers and how it was almost like a groundswell. It came from people really wanted that, or that's how the questioner sees it. And so they say, what could allow a groundswell like with altar servers to happen? And I think joined with that, somebody said, what advice would you give for the idea of like speaking truth to power, of trying to get those who are in power to speak up if they support the issue of women deacons?
Yeah, that is another kind of thing that drives me crazy. Many bishops have said to me privately, oh, I really support women deacons. I said, well, what have you said about it publicly? Oh, well, I'm waiting for the Holy Father to say something. And I'm right behind you, Phyllis. I think that I think it's important at every level for every person to say something, and it doesn't matter to me what the individual says, because we all have different opinions. This to me is the movement of the Spirit. We need to pray and think about these things and discuss them with whomever we can discuss them. In terms of speaking truth to power, I think I've said this before, if you want to get a message to your bishop, write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper and put his name in it, because that'll be on his desk a whole lot quicker than any letter from you through the postal service. To keep the discussion going in whatever way you can. And if it means speaking truth to power. Now, on the issue of women altar servers, it took a long while. The 1983 code really officially allowed women altar service, and then in the early 90s, the question went up before the Pontifical Commission for the Interpretation of Legislative Texts, and they said, "Oh yeah, that means women." So it took about 10 years. But, you know, no priest needs to be forced to have a female altar server, and bishops don't have to have them. And so I think, but then that goes back to culture. There are some cultures that really couldn't handle it, just as some cultures can't handle women deacons. That's why I think the key is the hope is in the Amazon Synod. You know, there's a new ecclesial group headed by Cardinal Humas, who was from Brazil, who was the head of the of RAPOM, which I can't pronounce their title in Spanish, but they were the group that really were the moving force behind the most recent synod. Now there's a new official ecclesial group made up of 10 bishops, one from each of the 9 Amazon region territories or countries, with the presidency of Cardinal Humas. These are the people who are supposed to be implementing what the Amazon Synod asked for. And I think if the Amazon Synod, if this group then goes to the Holy Father with the request, because the earlier question was, who can make these things happen? The Holy Father has said, he said specifically to bishops from Brazil at Liminas a couple of years ago, if you want married priests, ask me. So I do feel that the request will come, and the request I think will come certainly for the installation of women as lectors and acolytes, and I would think to ordain women as deacons. Now, in Quaere Amazonia, which is the Holy Father's response to the final document from the Amazon Synod, he doesn't favor women deacons immediately. He really speaks to the lay participation in the church, and he speaks very, very fondly about, I mean, the footnote is paragraph, well, I think it's paragraph 94, where he speaks about Canon 517, paragraph 2, parish life coordinators, who can be lay people, married, singular, religious, or deacons. And I think he says the most important thing here is to keep the parish community together. And as best we can, 60%, 67% of the parish communities in the Amazon region are run by women, mostly by women religious. But I think by going out front and saying, okay, now all those women religious have to be ordained as deacons, that's incorrect. If those women religious want to be ordained as deacons, that's a separate issue. But the point is, he asks the bishops to officially appoint, and he's speaking specifically about 517, paragraph 2, parish life coordinators. So in terms of speaking truth to power, the people of the Amazon region let their bishops know, their bishops let the Holy Father know. Now it's come back to their bishops, and I think the Holy Father will then hear from them in the not too far future, not too far distant future. What can we do? Bring it up. You know, it is difficult. It is difficult because you're still going to run into priests and bishops who think women are stupid and unclean. And that's a strong statement, but it happens to be true. I don't think things are that much different now than they were in the 14th century, in the 5th century, when Pope Gelasius basically got hysterical that female deacons were performing diaconal functions at the altar during the Mass. So, but we need to educate them. And my mother used to say, you know, you attract more flies with honey than with vinegar. So I think actually women and even older women are the best ones to deploy in this kind of a situation, because maybe they wouldn't be that threatening to some of the people they're talking to. You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Yeah, and I think that a number of commenters in the chat have talked about, you know, there's a bravery that comes, and so to be able to speak up and to do that. So I think that's wonderful. Phyllis, one of the questions, it's a new question. You know, we've been doing these so often, and I heard it and I thought, oh, I want to hear Phyllis's response to this. And so the questioner says, and you talked about that movement towards female altar servers, that was like a 10-year process. And so the questioner says, what do you think the role of women in the church will be like in 10 years? 10 years time, what will women in the church look like?
Well, I hope that women in the church will be preaching. I hope that women in the church will be managing the church's social service agencies. I hope that women in the church will be in, as the Holy Father says, have positions of more responsibility. The church is hamstrung by its own law. So I think that there are things that can happen without changing law that drastically. But I don't know that we're going to see women priests or women cardinals or Pace Pope Joan or women Pope, I hope women don't quit. I think, we think of the church and I think of the message of Jesus, and I'm more interested in the gospel than I am in the hierarchy. And so I would hope that women in the church would continue to carry the message of Christ. I learned to say the rosary from my grandmother, not from any priest or anybody in school. I didn't go to Catholic school until I was in high school anyway. So I think the role of the women in the church is certainly in the home. But in terms of official ministry, I think we'll certainly see more women chancellors, although I had one woman chancellor say to me not too long ago, the problem of being a woman in an all priest situation is kind of like being a hood ornament, and so you don't want to be the token female. I think a more integral presence of women in the church is what the Holy Father is asking for, and I tell you, a more incisive presence of women in the church. But I will tell you that in 2006, Pope Benedict said the same thing, and here we are, 14 years later, with nothing really changed.
Phyllis, another line of questioning that came in was asking you to explore or speak to, Pope Francis has expressed a concern or a caution about clericalism. And can you address that in the discussion of women being ordained and the risks of falling into further clericalism?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's apples and oranges. Clericalism means I'm in charge and you're not. I'm smarter than you are, so be quiet or go away. And that's a problem that infects any profession. There's a certain amount of clericalism that we are the officers of the organization and you're not. Francis is quite interested in having our church look more like a circle and less like a triangle. And in terms of, the word is funny, clericalizing women, don't clericalize the laity. That doesn't mean clericalism. What it means is that there's a difference. We do have a distinction it has grown in our history. So we will accept, I think we can accept the ordination of some women as deacons, which is a specific vocation, have them specifically representing the rest of the church, bringing the prayer of the people back to the people, and bringing the ministry of the bishop to the people of God. But anyway, I hope that makes sense. But yeah. I don't know where we'll be in 10 years. I don't know where we're going to be in 10 minutes. So,
Yeah, it's $1 million question, but I thought it's an interesting take, because I think so often we see that there's no progress being made right now, and then we think, decades down the road. I think 10 years gives us a good framework. So it's interesting to hear your take on that, and who knows? We'll see what happens. We have about 4 minutes left, and I want to be keep to that time. There were a couple of questions that came in, Phyllis, about, women have been doing the theological training indirectly for the diaconate. They get advanced degrees in theology, masters of divinity. And so do you think, as we look towards the possibility of women deacons, do you think that will be taken into consideration, that women are training in these fields or have the background? And then another question that came kind of intersects with that is, can women petition to start taking diaconate courses?
Yeah, well, I did in 1978. I think a couple of things. In 2002, there was an instruction that was jointly signed by the Congregation for Clergy and the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and by one of the Congregation for Education, which said, it was 4 paragraphs long. It was basically directed at the bishops in Germany who were training women for the diaconate. And it said, basically, don't train women for the diaconate because we don't think we want to ordain them. I think anybody can train. Certainly, there are two separate things we're talking about here. One is taking theological training and ministerial training, particularly for pastoral ministry, and the other is the vocation to the diaconate. And these are separate things. So I would encourage people to train, but know that it can be hard to get a job. And that is why we see so many well-trained Catholic women going to other denominations to be ordained, and to have pastoral ministry. So the encouragement of the Holy Father for lay ministry, I wouldn't take as a negative, because not everybody has the vocation to the diaconate. But I would see it as an encouragement for more women to train, more women to get involved in ministry. And quite frankly, those are the younger women. If you're talking about the younger women in the church, they're not on this call because they're out ministering. They're in some hospital or in some prison right now. And they went to Berkeley, or they went to the Aquinas Institute in St. Louis, or they went to the Boston University School of Theology and Ministry. And they are doing diaconal work. The point is to have, if they find that vocation, to have that vocation recognized and affirmed by the church.
Well, that's wonderful, Phyllis. We have come on 8:30, so I don't know, do you have anything else you'd like to add, anything you'd like to leave us with?
No, but tell people about the coming webinars that we're going to have, Colleen.
Yes, so we have upcoming webinars. So we have one that is scheduled for Monday, November 16th. So you can mark your calendar for that, and an invitation will come out in a little bit closer to November 16th. And then also in December, on December 14th. So both of those are Mondays, similar to tonight. They'll be at 7:30 Eastern time. So you can mark your calendar, November 16th and December 14th. We remind you, you can register to receive Phyllis's column, and that'll connect you into the National Catholic Reporter mailing list, so you'll get invitations. What else, Phyllis?
Well, I just want to say, if you have either COVID or election fatigue, I just remembered that at 7 o'clock on election night, November 3rd, I'm going to be speaking, interviewed in Australia about my book, Women Icons of Christ. And I will put that on my Facebook page. I don't think I have a column coming out before then, but I can put the link when I get it on the Facebook page. So it's the Broken Bay Institute in Australia, and they're going to be interviewing me at 7 o'clock New York time. So on November 3rd. And I asked them to finish up before the polls close. So if you have had it with the election, maybe you watch me on that. But I hope we'll see you on the coming webinars as well.
Yeah, I think this is a great place, and we have a wonderful conversation, and people have really been enriched by the conversations that are happening in the chat. And thank you, Phyllis, for all that you have given. And there are wonderful resources out there, wonderful webinars that are going on all over the place about women deacons. And so we encourage you to seek those out and to remain plugged in, keep speaking up, and have your voice heard because you matter and because the Holy Spirit is moving. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we'll look forward to being together again in November. Okay, have a good night, everyone.